Thank you for listening to How to Be an Adult. Due to technical difficulties, the audio for today's episode is somewhat degraded relative to our usual standards. You may hear some clicks throughout which are on our side and not on yours. Please be assured that in the next episode, our audio will be back to our normal high quality. Now, on to the show. Every time you've pushed aside your morality, every time you felt like you had to not rock the boat, every time you said yes when you actually meant no. I know for the first 18 years of your life, you just had to acquiesce and conform to whatever environment would actually be the path of more resistance to ignore your own heart's cries. Welcome to How to Be an Adult, a podcast created by the team at the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada, where we make hypnosis make sense. We offer practical guidance for people just like you who've inadvertently become adults and don't know what to do about it. Whether you're 18 or 80, this show is the trail guide to life that you didn't get when you gained equality with your parents. We share our thoughts in public to democratize self-assurance, self-love, and self-respect. I'm Luke Chow, and today I'm going to tell you how to stop being a people pleaser. When I was a child, I was often praised for being obedient, and at the same time, I heard my parents disparage children who were disobedient, or today we could say have a mind of their own. What that meant was I was a good child if I said yes to what my parents wanted. I would be a bad child if I said no to what my parents wanted. And of course, who doesn't want to be a good kid? Now, the older I got, the more I realized that this pseudo-morality, because let's be frank, it's not a sound moral framework, was not for my own development. It was for the convenience of those who were supposed to care for me. This false morality, which implies you're only good if you say yes and you're bad if you say no, is often exploited by your boss, your friends, perhaps your partner. And if you've felt it's hard to say no under these circumstances, it's probably because of that incorrect moral framework that you got as a child, and which I'm claiming you have to abandon as an adult to fully, as the show says, be an adult. So how should you think instead of this pseudo-morality that implies you're only good if you're agreeable? Well, what I advise my clients of is to elevate authentic, truthful, and genuine speech above merely agreeable speech where you're going to say yes, irrespective of what you really think and feel and believe it in your heart. For many of you, your propensity to say yes, even when in your heart you feel like the only answer is no, is a trauma response. We're familiar with trauma responses being to fight or to flee, but there are a couple of other F words that are lesser known, and the two are fawn and freeze. So the propensity to say yes when you mean no is the fawning response. Not everyone is a fighter, not everyone is a fleer, not everyone's a freezer. People pleasers, especially those who have an upbringing like I've described, have been conditioned to fawn, to make it so other people are literally pleased with you, not because you've adhered to moral principles, but because you've done the things that they wanted to and you've not raised their ire. And like the other trauma responses, this response is usually automatic. It feels so instinctive and natural and deeply ingrained that you might not even be aware that you're having this trauma response as opposed to reacting in the moment as a full-grown adult. But here's the thing. If only you could erase your morality and follow the morality of everybody else and be happy. Now, I'm going to save you the trouble of finding this out for yourself, because you cannot be a happy, fulfilled, peaceful person while neglecting your morality. And that's what ends up happening. It's not that you erase it. It's not that you successfully repress it. What actually happens is your morality is still there. It's kind of simmering beneath the surface, but it doesn't go away. So when you act against your ethics, you're going to end up feeling angry and resentful. This is why so-called nice guys, or I guess there's also discourse on the internet about nice girls, are not actually nice. They're quite resentful. They enter into these covert agreements with other people that the other people don't even know about. And it's because one's morality doesn't disappear just because you're pretending it's not there. So let's acknowledge, as a human being, you're a moral being. You have a sense of good and bad and right and wrong. You have a sense of what is true and what is false. And probably it doesn't sit well with you to have to swallow something you know to be false or wrong or bad. And that's a reality we have to acknowledge in order to help you overcome your people pleasing. People pleasers seem to think that everyone else counts except for them. Everyone else's thoughts count except for theirs. Everyone else's morality counts except for theirs. But that's not the position you're in as an adult, even if that's the position you had to act in as a child. As an adult, you're a first-class citizen. You're up here with the rest of us. I'm going to treat you as an equal because that's who you are. And I'd be totally delusional, acting like I'm better than you or superior to you. And you also would be falsely deflating yourself if you acted like you're less than another or that you didn't count. Now, at first, to a recovering people pleaser, this degree of equality feels like it's too much. It's going to feel like too much self-love, too much self-respect. It might even feel like you're getting, quote, too big for your britches. It might even feel like, what if you get too big of an ego, you become too arrogant? But here's the standard. If you're treating yourself as you'd like to see a younger sibling treated, if you're treating yourself like a friend, if you're treating yourself as you believe family or a colleague ought to be treated, then you are not getting too big of a head. You're claiming the legitimate position of equality that you actually have with men and women on this planet. It is only a child who is honestly a second-class citizen, who is disenfranchised, who can't even sign their own contracts or make their own agreements. But once you turn, and it's agreed upon, 18, once you turn 18, you gain first-class status, and you have first-class status for the rest of your life. So I want you to recognize that you are an equal to your mom and your dad, to people who used to be your teachers, to your boss, to your boss's boss, to the multimillionaire down the street, and you are not their lesser. And this is the society that you live in. It's not just me who's saying this idealistically like it's pre-French Revolution. It's me putting into words the liberal democracy you actually inhabit, most likely if you're watching this video or listening to this podcast. So let's recognize you to be an adult of equal moral stature as the other adults in your life. This makes it so that others are never automatically right or good in a disagreement. You are never automatically wrong or bad in a disagreement. Sometimes you're going to be right and sometimes you're going to be wrong. Sometimes the other person, even if they're your boss or a multimillionaire, sometimes they're going to be right, sometimes they're going to be wrong. One of the benefits of this equality is that everyone has a chance to self-express. Everyone has a chance to weigh in on important matters. And this is obvious at the voting booth, of course, right? It's obvious at a town hall where anyone can walk up to the microphone. Even if they're not yet 18, they can walk up to the microphone and ask about what their future is going to look like. I know that there are different ages of adulthood, from 18 to, I think the oldest person was in her 120s. But I think I've made this point before. At the same time that older adults could claim, well, they've been on the planet longer, right? Younger adults can claim they're going to have to be on this planet longer. So let's just call it even. Let's say it all balances out. Let's still count you as an equal, even to people 1 or 2 generations older than you. Now, I've been making a case for your equality, because this will be the foundation upon which you can feel like it's not just morally permissible, but perhaps morally obligatory to say no when in your assessment that's the correct answer. That's where it feels maybe even morally wrong to have to say yes, if in your heart you feel like no is the correct answer. One of the first points I made in this episode is that people pleasing comes from a kind of false morality that's meant to control children. It is not a mature morality for a first class citizen. So if we're going to kind of take away the false morality, I am giving you a more mature, sophisticated adult morality that allows you to be well adapted to a typical workplace or neighborhood function or family gathering. Having heard me say all of this makes it so that if someone acts like they're your superior and they're not actually signing your paychecks, for example, then you can see through the pretense. You can say no if in your heart that's the correct answer. Every time you've people pleased, you've denied. I know it's unconscious. I know it's not intentional, but you've denied your equality, which you actually have. Every time you've pushed aside your morality, every time you felt like you had to not rock the boat, every time you said yes when you actually meant no, you pushed yourself aside. And I am saying totally unnecessarily. Now, I do know that you might lose some friends who'd gotten accustomed to taking advantage of you. I do know that if there's, let's say, a narcissistic boss in your workplace, that you might have to find a better work environment. This is all true. I live in the real world. I know how it works. I am still telling you that you owe it to yourself to be authentic and truthful and forthright with your peers. And yes, I count even the scary adults around you as your peers, and they are not your superior. If you've never put this to the test, you might be surprised that when you start to treat yourself as an equal and you give others a very strong hint that you're a self-loving, self-respecting person, others are afraid to commit the social faux pas of offending you. Now, if people often offend you, if they kind of treat you like you're a child whose opinions don't matter, it's probably because they took a hint from you that you aren't a self-loving, self-respecting person who treats themselves as an equal to them. Now, people do consider you to be your own authority. So if you show up in this world and you're self-loving, you're self-respecting, you treat yourself as an equal to anyone, others will not want to commit the social faux pas of being wrong about you and then risk offending you. So you have a lot of say in how other people treat you. This is not like a magic law of attraction thing, by the way. It doesn't work through magical or mystical powers that the way you treat yourself is then reflected in the ways other people treat you. It's actually that. People can read it in your face. They can read it in your body language. They can read it in what you'll tolerate and what you won't, and they'll read it in how you carry yourself. Doing the inner work of using your heart to love you too, and to elevate yourself up to the status of a peer with those around you. This is going to help you, and it's going to help those around you know how they should properly deal with you so that they don't piss you off. Now, it would be right for the people around you to at least sometimes think about not angering you. It would honestly be weird if the people around you don't care if you're angry or not. Right? The way we have a polite society, the way we have decency in our neighborhoods is that we don't want to offend those people we see as peers. If people are willing to offend you very easily, they probably don't see you as a peer. And, well, before you get rid of them, it is worth using your heart to love you too, using your mind to respect you too, showing up in this world as a self-loving, self-respecting person, and elevating authentic, genuine speech that you also feel in your heart to be good, to be moral, above merely agreeable speech. Hopefully I am able to articulate in this episode some explanatory factors for why, as a people pleaser, things often don't go your way, or you don't get the respect that you're looking for. And hopefully you're able to hear in all of this perhaps a path out. Now, we're building a moral framework for how you're going to overcome people pleasing so that you can feel you're a good person, even if you're rocking the boat, even if you're ruffling feathers, even if someone is visibly angry or upset or disappointed because you spoke truthfully that you couldn't. Often we feel like we're automatically bad if another adult, a member of our peer group, is angry at us or upset at us, but that comes from the idea that others are automatically right. And in a disagreement, we're automatically wrong, which is, again, it's a thought of a child in a dysfunctional household. If instead you recognize, well, sometimes you're right, sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right, sometimes you're wrong, then it's worth having a discussion where everyone's speaking as truthfully as they can and everyone's putting their best thoughts out there and not just the thought that they guess would make the other person happy. When you're an adult among adults, if the people around you are mature enough, they generally respect truthful speech that they disagree with. They generally respect principled speech that is in contradiction with their own principles, because the common ground is at least you've got some principles that you care about. So, like, for example, I eat pork, but if someone else is a devout Muslim or Jew, then, I mean, I'm not going to feed them bacon. We can be friends, and we can follow different rules and principles in our own personal lives. So I'm going to take this point of being a good person and saying no at the same time, and I'm going to make it as big as I can make it. If we think about people we consider to be our heroes, right? So it could be Gandhi or Jesus Christ, or it could be Martin Luther King Jr. or Rosa Parks. If we think of our heroes, they said no when they saw injustice. And that's the reason we consider them to be paragons of virtue. They didn't just roll over and say, okay, well, I guess this is the way it is, so I'll get to the back of the bus or I'll leave the bus because the seats have to be vacated. No, they spoke authentically, even when it upset people, even when it ruffled feathers, even if it got them arrested. And it is because they said a very difficult no, or at least a no that was difficult in the circumstances, that today we revere them. We live in a better world today because the heroes of the past were able and willing to say no to the status quo. So the ways you might say no in a family environment or a workplace might be less history-changing than the examples I just gave, but I give these examples so that you can see what one person saying no can do. One point you've heard me make in prior episodes is that you're not just passively living in a world that others have created. Others are also living in a world that you can actively help to create. And that is one of the privileges of having reached adulthood. Now, I know for the first 18 years of your life, you just had to acquiesce and conform to whatever environment your parents put you in. But now that you have adult status and you have it for life, you don't just have to acquiesce. So I'll back up a little bit to underscore a point that I don't want to get hidden in the message. To evolve morally, you have to count yourself as an adult in the first place. As a people pleaser, you might actually be counting yourself among adolescents or children, rather than the people you view to be full-fledged adults. But I can guarantee you, as a hypnotherapist with thousands of clients, that the people you see to be adults are just human beings like you. And probably they are not a deeper thinker than you. Probably they don't have like a stronger moral fiber than you have. It's just an apples to oranges comparison to compare everything you know about the complexity of your inner world with someone else's outer presentation when they go to work or when they show up at Thanksgiving dinner. So if you kind of compare yourself apples to apples, which again, as a hypnotherapist, I have the privilege of kind of seeing people apples to apples, then you are equally an adult to the uncle who gets loud and belligerent, because that in itself is not a marker of adulthood. At a holiday party, you can kind of see when people don't have to maintain the strict hierarchy to organize a workplace, people treat themselves and others much more on a level playing field. Or if you happen to meet an executive at your company at a music festival and they're in a t-shirt and maybe they've had a toke, well, you can see their equality with you. Now, I paint these hypotheticals, so if you haven't actually seen this, you might just have to take my word for it. The people you see as more adult than you are not. They're just only showing you the socially acceptable facade when they're in front of you. But behind the scenes, they're probably approximately as messy as you are. So I want you to treat yourself as a peer to all the men and women in this world. And I want you to treat yourself as a full-fledged human being with independence of thought and feeling and morality. The world forms into the best shape it can form into if we harness the collective intellect of humanity by having each individual exercise their independence of thought and feeling and morality. So if everyone on the planet is willing to say, well, no, I can't abide by that, if they feel in their hearts that they can't abide by that, we wouldn't have had Nazi Germany. Hopefully we wouldn't have had pogroms. It is because of the so-called madness of crowds, the desire to conform, to not rock the boat, to say yes when in your heart you know what you're doing is wrong, that gets people swept up into these mass movements. But if everyone individually assesses with their own heart, with their own morality, whether they individually can do a particular thing to another particular person, I would assert the world would be a better place. And that's the world that I'm helping to create because I'm fully aware I don't just exist in a world created by others. Others also exist in a world that through my expression of ideas, through the ways I conduct myself, that I'm helping to create. I would guess that if, let's say, you're by your window and then all of a sudden this sparrow crashes into the window and falls upon the windowsill and then starts making noises of distress, I would guess you would have a hard time ignoring the animal, that you would feel an obligation, a duty to at least Google what to do in that situation, or at least to call a friend who knows a veterinarian who you could talk to on the phone. I would guess that it is the path of less resistance for you to take care of that wounded animal in some way than to totally ignore it and then to put it out of your mind. I would argue that in a similar way, if your morality is calling out for you to say, well, no, we can't do that, it is perhaps the path of less resistance to follow that call of duty, as it would be. It would actually be the path of more resistance to ignore your own heart's cries. Now, if you've been a people pleaser your whole life, you've been taking the path of more resistance. I know this seems like a very foreign concept to you if you haven't tried living authentically and genuinely and being 100% you. But you might just have to take my word for it, having been on both sides, that it is easier for me to speak my mind and be done with it and fulfill my obligation to speak truthfully than to harbor the grudge or the resentment and then to ignore my heart's cries to do something about the situation. I mean, that is the path of more resistance, even if that's the path that you've become accustomed to. So it's only at first that you might just have to take my word for it. But then you can start to see for yourself if in small ways you're telling the waiter, hey, I didn't order it like this. Could you please send it back to the kitchen, right? But then you're going to see there's a load that's been lifted off your heart. You can leave the restaurant a positive review when you leave, right? If you do flag down the waiter and you tell them about the problem with the order. So even if in small ways you're ceasing to people please, you're going to start to see in real life that speaking truthfully and authentically is the path of less resistance. I want to point out that ceasing to people please is not going to turn you into a self-centered jerk. And this is a fear that you probably have. If you're so accustomed to being beneath other people and elevating others above you, then sure, it's going to feel like an over-elevation to place yourself on the same plane you've elevated everybody else up to. But you belong on the same plane you've elevated everyone else up to. So even if at first it feels like an over-elevation, again, you might have to take my word for it, but that's why you're listening to the podcast, it's going to start to feel like a new normal to treat yourself as a peer to your fellow adults. And then it's not going to feel like an over-elevation. It's going to feel like your rightful place. Sometimes the idea that you have to self-sacrifice to make others happy comes from the idea that happiness or love is a zero-sum game. But emotions don't work like that. If everyone on the planet were happy, we're not robbing another planet of its happiness. We're actually just increasing the total net amount of happiness in the universe if everyone on the planet is happy or peaceful or loving or self-respecting and self-caring. If you have a dozen plants on your windowsill, you can water every one of them. There's enough sunlight for all of them. You don't have to neglect one so the others get more water or light. So what I want you to do is to count yourself as one of the plants on the windowsill, to love and respect yourself in equal measure to how much you love and respect others. And that probably fits your moral framework. If you've ever heard the advice to put yourself first, that probably doesn't actually fit into your moral framework, but I'm saying you don't have to. I don't want you always putting yourself first. I mean, you can. I mean, you know, it's your life. But what I'm saying is you don't have to. In order to be self-loving and self-respecting, it is not a zero-sum game. It's a positive-sum game. When you're self-loving and self-respecting and self-caring in equal measure to others, when you elevate yourself up to the same high level you've elevated others, it is a net benefit for everyone. And that's why you're not about to turn into a self-centered jerk just because you cease to people please. To go back to an example that I gave earlier, when Rosa Parks held up that bus, refusing to vacate her seat, she offended people that day. She ruffled a lot of feathers. People were upset. The police were called. She got arrested. She had to defend herself in court. That's what civil disobedience is like. So Thoreau wrote a very good essay on civil disobedience that I recommend reading if you want more of a fleshed out moral argument for why we should do it. As many people as there were who thought that Rosa Parks was a self-centered jerk on that day, she wasn't. She did humanity a huge, huge service. I don't want to tear up. But she did. She did humanity a massive service. And I know she suffered later in life, right? It took a toll on her. But I'm speaking about her in the ways I am right now because I recognize that it was difficult and she did it anyway. If you want others to have this much respect for you, then to also say no when you mean no is going to help in that regard. Now, sometimes you might feel like you have to people please because you have others who depend on you. So let's say you're taking care of aging parents, for example. You might feel that, well, okay, well, they depend on you, so you gotta sacrifice to take care of them. Here's what I'm gonna say to that. A lifeguard swimming out to sea to rescue a drowning man has to keep their head above water in full recognition of the reality they're a living human being. They have to keep their head above water, and that ensures 0 people drown, not 2. It serves no one if the lifeguard gets pulled under, if the firefighter doesn't have adequate protection, if the frontline healthcare staff are last in line for PPE during a pandemic. If you have people who depend on you, you owe it to them and to you to metaphorically put on your own mask first. Now, that's a recognition of your aliveness, of your humanity, which is a point I've made already this episode. We have to recognize these material truths about you so that we recognize you're a moral being. We can't just suppress or ignore your morality. If it wasn't the woman named Rosa Parks, it would have been someone else who just got fed up and had to say and do something about it. So I know it's going to help some of you to hear this because it's a people-pleasing episode, as harsh as this might sound. But I mistrust people-pleasers. When they say yes, they might mean yes, and they might mean no, and they might even mean absolutely not. I cannot trust someone who says things that they don't mean. If you want to please the people around you and they're mature enough adults, you want them to be able to trust the things you say. If you say yes when you mean yes, if you say no when you mean no, if you say absolutely not when you mean absolutely not, others will find you to be more trustworthy and they're going to be pleased by that. Again, people pleasers follow the rules for children in dysfunctional households. You're not a child. You don't have to follow the rules for children. And in any case, not every child grew up in a household where they were taught that they're only good if they say yes. Because people pleasers push aside their morality just to say yes, meaning no, I also can't trust them to do the right thing. Because they're often zero-sum thinkers, my success becomes their failure. Probably at some point, if I become very successful or happy, if I have a beautiful girlfriend or wealth, they're probably gonna at some point resent me for it with their zero-sum thinking. So I want you to stop doing that to yourself. Stop inflicting that upon those around you. Those around you might not have the right words to express to you what I'm expressing to you in this episode, but that's why I made the podcast. It's so that I can explain how to be an adult, how to fit in among self-loving and self-respecting people. They will value your self-love and your self-respect. They don't value your people-pleasing for the reasons I just described to you. I want you to elevate yourself up to the same high level you've elevated everybody else up to. And then you can also, in a positive sum manner, enjoy the benefits of such deep self-love and self-respect and self-esteem. The final point I'll make is that it's the healthy wolf that'll stand her ground and bare her teeth and growl when her territory is invaded to prevent a fight. The unhealthy wolf just rolls over. I want you to be the healthy wolf. Our human equivalent of standing our ground and baring our teeth and growling is to say no. It is very civilized to say no in its many variations. No, thank you. I'd rather not. I can't abide by that. Not a chance. Absolutely not. It is very civilized to use these words and then to prevent a fight, than to put yourself in a situation where you resent someone and they don't even know it because you haven't authentically expressed, what was really in your heart and mind. Thank you again for listening. This podcast is only possible because of the work I'm doing through the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis in Toronto, Canada. We're a group of essentially practical philosophers. We think about these issues, we think deeply about them, and then we communicate our answers to our clients. I know it says hypnosis on the door, on the business name. That's the method by which we get these ideas into your head more effectively than a podcast can. So if you like the ideas we've shared, you can contact me through the Morpheus Clinic for Hypnosis at www.morpheusclinic.com. For more ideas like the ones in this podcast episode, you can follow us on YouTube at Morpheus Hypnosis or subscribe to How to Be an Adult on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening. I hope I've been of some help to you.